Today we're going to talk about the why of data governance as part of our DonorScape webinar series. So thanks for joining us this afternoon. Fridays are tough, but hopefully this is a good way to end the week. What I like to say to my team, especially on a Friday, is rock and roll and roll and rock, and let's get started. So let's get finished. What I want to share with you today is the agenda, what we're going to go through, and some rules of the road around our webinar. If you have questions, there is a Q&A chat box. We'll be more than happy to look at the Q&A chat box and either try to address the question during the webinar, and if not during the webinar, we will post the answers to the questions on our website afterwards. The pieces that we're going to talk about today, we're going to do a few introductions. We're going to talk about the why of data governance and do some definitions around that. We're going to talk about the components of data governance and what actually makes up a data governance program. And then we're going to talk about the phases of implementation and what are the parts to the phases and how does that cycle work. We're going to talk a little bit about what the impact of data governance is on analytics. And then I think that's about it. And then we'll talk a little bit about DonorScape. So where we'll start is with introductions. For those of you that don't know me, there's my mugshot. My name is Richard Geiger, and I've been in the nonprofit technology business process and strategy business for more than 20 years. My background is in transportation planning, and I sort of grew up in my first sets of jobs counting cars and buses and pedestrians and seeing how many parking spots you needed and looking at alternative fuel vehicles and the Clean Air Act and all those kind of things. But transportation planning is actually where I first got my taste and my love for numbers and counting stuff. And so I have a real passion for being able to, use data to make decisions and having confidence in what that data is telling us to help tell a story, right? I'm a recovering major gift officer, so any of you on the phone who are major gift officers, I have walked in those shoes at some point in time, and I'm very passionate about helping organizations deliver more mission, and I've been pretty fortunate over the past 20 years to be able to do that. Not only with analytics, but through technology and some good old volunteering and phone calling and door knocking. So that's me. I look forward to meeting some of you afterwards. Please feel free to give me a call or an email if you have any comments or questions. I'd love to connect. For those of you who aren't familiar with Grenzebach Glier, our motto is, our mission is advancing yours. And there are a few things that I wanted to share with you, right? We've been in business for about 60 years. We have been involved and served more than 3,000 institutions. But really what's important about that number right below there is we've actually screened more than 600 million records. And that gives us a really deep and wide look at what prospects look like, how they've turned into donors, and what kind of donors have they been and how have they engaged. So that, as we go through our presentation today, remember that data tells that story, and we've been able to tell that story at Grenzebach for a long time. We're pretty proud that we provide evidence-based guidance on the wealth of individuals and how that relates to their likelihood to give and what kind of wealth they have and what kind of wealth that they will actually convey. Few other interesting numbers of note. Today in our client base, we're proud to work with organizations that have more than $60 billion worth of current campaign and fundraising goals. So they're out there pounding the pavement every day with audacious fundraising goals for audacious missions. And we've been pretty fortunate to be involved with clients that have done billion-dollar campaigns, and we've been involved with clients that have done more than $100 billion campaigns. So we know a lot about fundraising, and we know a lot about it at lots of different levels. I wanted to share with you a few of our analytic partners. And we, as you can tell, sort of from the sheet I like to hang on my refrigerator, we work with small, medium, large, and extra large across all the different verticals in nonprofits. So we work, in higher ed, independent schools, healthcare, academic medicine, the arts and culture space, cause and cure, some faith-based. And the thing that is I'm really proud of is that our solutions and the way that we work with those clients are scalable and repeatable. So, we're able to help small organizations be successful, just like we are able to help large ones. Let me take a breath, or at least a sip of my water, before we get into the why of data governance. And so we'll turn to sort of the definition page. I wanted to start with a definition, and I went to Gartner to get this, and it's pretty wordy. So I'm going to read it and point out a few things. So data governance is the specification of decision rights in an accountability framework to ensure the appropriate behavior in the valuation, consumption, and control of data and analytics. So what does that really mean? Well, it means a few things, right? An accountability framework is that there has to be rules and engagement around data and how organizations and people use it, right? Decision rights are sort of the policies and the procedures around who uses data and what decisions do we make. Appropriate behavior is, well, I think we all know what appropriate behavior is using it for good and not evil. I guess that would be my shortcut, right? And then the last part, valuation and consumption. How do you take data and actually absorb it and consume it in your organization to actually have it provide value? And so I bring it down into sort of the three big whys, right? Data deluge is a real thing. And so I love that word deluge. And the first time that I read about it when it was associated with data was, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago in an article in The Economist. And basically what that means is that there are vast quantities of data that are created all the time. And we, as folks who work with data, have to figure out, what do we keep? What can we get? And how do we manage it? And I guess the last part is how do we actually let it go? And I read this story, a case study about a data governance group at McGraw-Hill. And McGraw-Hill is, one of those old school publishing companies. And the comment that their CIO made was something like, McGraw-Hill has created more data in the last 10 years than they have in their archives or have created or maintained and managed in their first 100 years of business. And you can imagine why this deluge is happening. Just think about the internet and all the places that we click. And the fact that, 10, 15 years ago, email was sort of a new thing, and online and websites and online donating was a new thing. And today we have to figure out, how do we engage with Facebook to bring money into our organizations, or to engage with those constituents, or Pinterest, or Twitter, or Instagram, or Snapchat, or insert name here of what's coming next, right? The next why around data is that, it's got to have value. It's got to have some sort of reason in supporting the business, the mission, the goals, the objectives of your organization. And as folks that maintain and use data, we have to have the ability to actually go out and say to our organization, there is return on investment here. We have to think about the quality, the way that folks are using that data, and spend money to maintain it. And we'll talk a little bit about that in the next few slides. But, you know, when we talk about value, I just want to sort of put a marker here. We can talk about things like hair color. I normally tell a story about, I used to work with someone who in the summer their hair was very, very blonde, and in the winter it was very, very brown. And they dyed their hair based upon the season. Now, we had this really great database in the CRM, and we were able to actually sort of create a data point that said hair color. But as we went through to evaluate, is hair color something that we want to work with? Are we a cosmetology school? Do we work with a consumer product goods organization? How would we use it? How would we maintain it? And so think about hair color, and we're going to try to make the jump to addresses, email addresses, phone numbers, cell phone numbers, and so keep that in mind and put a little doodle on your on a Post-it note on that one. And then the last part I want to talk about on this, the why of data governance defined is data quality, right? And data quality is required for consistency, right? Quality must be there because folks in organizations have to have confidence in the numbers and the reports that you're presenting in order to use that data to make strategic business decisions, to even make tactical decisions. And typically, when you use data to make decisions, that's where you go back to the ROI calculations because there are costs involved. Okay, so those are the three sort of data, the three sort of data whys that you have to remember, and the whys of why we have to do governance. Okay, I'm going to take another breath and move to the next slide. And what I want to talk a little bit about here is, you know, the standard components of a data governance program. And you can see we have data governance in the middle, and there are really 6 phases, 6 stages, 6 parts, 6 components, 6 things that make them up. And where I want to start is with policy and standards, right? And so any data governance program is going to be anchored by what the rules of engagement are for data and what the definition of that data is, right? And policy and standards are sort of that framework on which all things come underneath. The second part, number 2, quality, I'm going to go from right clockwise back around, right, is really about the delivery, the ability to deliver meaningful data to your organization and the hygiene around it to keep it up, right? So if you have data and you're going to use it for metrics and decisions, it's gotta show confidence, and it's got to show confidence and quality consistently. The third item is privacy and security, right? What is the protection of the data that you need in place in your organization to prevent unauthorized access? So, you know, we work in fundraising, right? And what we know is, right, before PCI compliance came, credit card numbers could be anywhere or within organizations on any pieces of paper and unencrypted and could be stored in databases. And we know today that that's just not the case, right? And any of you all who have been involved in security audits are probably familiar with the SAS 70 standard, the SOC standards, the different reporting mechanisms and the auditing standards that, you know, you have to sort of be engaged in to make sure that you have a clean audit and that the folks that you come in contact with, that you actually share things with, have the same level of standards that you do. Number 4, user awareness. So we know that organizations and people need to understand why and how data governance works in the organization, and they need to understand, you know, who, what systems, what processes create, capture, and update data. Number 5 on technology, right? What things do you have in your arsenal to help you actually maintain data governance? You know, do you use a secure FTP site? Do you, have a password locker? You know, what are some of the technology? What are some of the things that you do to keep things clean? We used to call them cleaning queries, right? How many times do you look in your database to find out people who are more than 100 years old, or people who haven't been born yet, right? So how do you use technology to keep hygiene and look at those kind of pieces? And then the last one is compliance. We all know things like the European Union GDPR rules, the new rules in California, the CCPA Act. We all sort of know about HIPAA, PCI compliance, professional standards for our industries, like, you know, if we're in accounting, we know the FASB rules, CASE, AFP, APRA. Or even your, you know, what you need for organizational compliance and organizational rules. So when you think about what your program is and what data governance are, think about, do you have something that falls into each of these buckets? Okay. When you're thinking about designing and working through these components, there's 3 phases that you really want to think about for data governance, right? It's discovery, it's operationalizing, it's sustaining, right? And, you know, how do you work with each one of these phases over time? What's the low-hanging fruit? And where can you start to actually make the most impact in your organization based upon what outcomes you're looking for, okay? So we're going to go through the phases and see where we come up with. So the first phase is discovery, right? And really, it really starts with that profile of your data, and you've got to ask yourself the question, what is the data life cycle in your organization? How does data come in? What's the business process around it? And how does the organization handle it, right? There was a survey done, I don't know, 2 or 3 years ago by a group called the Nonprofit Hub. And 90% of the nonprofit respondents said that they collect data. So everybody agreed that they collected stuff. But of those 90% folks who actually collected data, 49% of them didn't know how they collected it, how they got it, where it came from, and they also didn't know how they used it. And that sort of goes to that second bullet point, or that second box. You need to use a data audit process that's sort of continual around each piece of data that you have, because you need to figure out how your data is captured, how does it get to you in your system, right? Who actually maintains it once it's captured, and then how is it updated? So you may capture someone's address because a major gift officer brings it in and puts it in a call report. But how do you maintain it? Is it a manual maintain, or is it a technology maintain? And do they live on Star Island or Miami, or do they live in Miami, Florida, right? And then how are you going to update it to make sure that you see those pieces? So for all the things that you work with, you have to be able to answer all 3 of those questions. And if you can't, you need to figure out, do I really need this or not, right? If you go diagonal and you walk through to the data alignment with the business goals, what's really important is to making sure you're collecting pieces and items that will help you make decisions, right? And so, you know, the question here is, I don't know, 10 years ago, email was not one of the main things that we used to actually do fundraising or talk to folks out in our community. You know, it was just sort of on its way up. And so, you know, the question here is, right, if you are trying to figure out what email open rates are or how email response rates are in your program, what data do you need for that, and how does that actually help you lead to other digital kind of metrics that you would be thinking about, okay? So if you can manage email and open rates, can you manage omni-channel, where folks actually are engaged in lots of different channels, whether it be face-to-face, digital, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera. And then the last piece here is this continual process, and this is the tough one here, right? Data deluge is a real thing, so you're always going to have to evaluate new pieces as they come in. On the operational side of the house, right? You start off with quality and rules typically lead to cleansing and maintenance, right? And so old school quality and rules talk about things like, we have addresses on file, we use NCOA before every mailing because we want to get a discount on our postal mailings. We use NCOA because we want to make sure the mail actually gets to the people. We actually take bounce backs out of our email list because we don't want to be put on the spam list for, you know, Google or, you know, for Gmail, right? And when you think about quality and rules, it typically leads into the doing of the cleansing and maintenance. And so that's important to think about, you know how you're going to capture, but then how do you keep it up to date? And that sort of goes to that documentation side of the house. When you think about, do you keep a data dictionary? Do you use business process diagrams? Do you use a RACI structure to figure out who's responsible, who's accountable? And how do you make sure that as you document, your data continues to have relevance? And then the last phase is the sustain phase, right? And hopefully, if you've done the first two phases right, you'll be able to actually go through and make it be part of your culture. And that as data and data governance becomes part of the work that you do, right, you understand who stewards it, who owns it, who uses it, you know, and figuring out, is that the same person or are those different people? And how do you create a governance group of all of the stakeholders so that all of the components stay fresh, right? This part here about maintaining a data policy is pretty important because that actually strengthens the data set. And you can see in the right-hand corner, we sort of move to that data becomes an asset for the organization. It becomes something that can be monetized, right? So in a lot of nonprofit organizations, they may trade names or sell names, or in some organizations that you work with, you actually may buy names, right? So quality control and you know, maintaining that asset is really important because you want to be able to figure out, is there monetization for it where you can actually bring revenue into the organization? And how will that data actually continually lead to being able to make better decisions? I want to give you some quick case studies here. So we'll give you one or two of them, and then we'll keep going. We're running short on time. The impact on analytics. So finding what's missing. In some organizations, by understanding and auditing the data that they have, they're able to understand what they're missing to figure out the evaluation of how important a prospect is to them. So at GG+A, we do work with folks to figure out, do you understand how old your constituents are? Do you know how many properties they own? Do they actually own properties, or are they just rental properties? Are there presence of kids? Have they been 100 years old for the past few times? So we talk about how do we actually keep data fresh, and then how do we actually fill in where organizations don't have that data in the demographic space, and also help make recommendations around whether data should actually be captured and how to use it. On quantifying the journey in the view, I have had a few organizations that have been able to actually work through data audits and using data to identify the highest valued constituents based upon the point of entry to the organization. So these organizations actually kept data and constituent sources, like I got this constituent from advocacy, I got them from being a donor, they were an alumni, they were a volunteer, and that, you know, based upon how they entered the organization, where they cross-pollinated, what value they had to the organization, and where acquisition should continue from. So some quick takeaways here. You know, the one that I want to really say that's the most important is the last one here. Data is nothing without insights. And so, you know, we just did a study, and you'll see this on our website, around where organizations are struggling with data and how to actually use it. And so data for data's sake isn't helpful, but data to make decisions, data to monetize, data that shows a return on investments are important. And what I would say to any organization is when you're looking at data governance and you're looking at figuring out what needs the most sort of work, look at what your business priorities are and look at what your metrics are and what you're trying to measure, and figure out, do I have the data to actually measure them? And am I capturing it? Am I maintaining it? And am I updating it? And that goes to that idea of, you know, that I talked about before. The goal is, right, I want to understand multi-channel responses. Well, I'm going to start by understanding email response rates. And if I can understand email response rates, maybe I can go to the next one on understanding Pinterest or Facebook or any of those other pieces. Close to the end here, I wanted to finish up by just sharing that, you know, we're pretty proud at GG+A that we help organizations build capacity through data insights, and we spend a lot of time with our clients when we do our modeling and our work with data on data quality, data cleansing, and filling in missing data. And it's important for us because we really want to make sure that we have the best identity resolution to match people with the assets and the wealth that they have, so that you have the best ability to understand likelihood and capacity. It does not help to have John Smith and John Smith Jr.'s assets attached to him. So we spend a lot of time on that. We spend a lot of energy on that, and that makes it's a differentiator in our space. And, you know, as we work through our engagements with our clients, we share that knowledge on what we found in terms of the cleanliness of their data, and we help them to sort of build and maintain better data sets so they can make better decisions about their constituents and about how they apply fundraising resources to those folks. So with that, I will say thank you for spending a really good 31 minutes with me today on sort of a speed date on data governance in an introduction and an overview. We look forward to working with you on your data governance or your data projects, or sharing some more depth around some of the needs that you may have. It's tough out there, and as fundraising is sort of ramping back up and getting back into gear, sort of in this new normal, data is becoming more important than ever because we have not as many resources, and we need to be able to figure out that we should spend the most time with those that have the best possible outcomes. So with that, I want to say thank you for your attention and your signing up today. And please feel free to reach out to myself, check our website. We have a lot of resources for fundraising in the time of the virus, and happy to talk to you about capacity and likelihood and how to help jumpstart your fundraising. So thank you very much, and please have a great afternoon. Thank you.